Folks, this beautiful city of Charleston, South Carolina, tells two stories through its architecture. One story is the obvious. It's the story of the magnificent dwellings, the big house, the mansions. In these mansions, you will find a story that delights, because inside these architecturally significant buildings, you'll find the arched ceilings, you'll find the drapes, you'll find the hardwood floors. You will find the antique furnishings. And on these antique furnishings, you'll find the place settings of gold and silver. And you'll find in these places the grand staircase, the staircase that will give you access to the upper levels of these buildings. But also in these buildings is a second set of stairs. It's the set of stairs that'll give you access to these places, the places of the enslaved. Now, while in that beautiful grand house, there could have been living about 5 people. In these spaces, anywhere from 2 to 18 people inside one of these dwellings, about 18 by 20 feet. And in these places also are hardwood floors, but hard for a different reason. Inside these spaces are what I'm attracted to, because again, these are the places of the enslaved, the places of my ancestors. My DNA has drawn me to these places, so close to these places that I've been spending nights in these spaces for the last 6 years, on these hardwood floors, hard for a very different reason. Hard because they spread their pallets on these floors, and that's where they slept. Now, when I started sleeping in slave dwellings 6 years ago, it was very challenging to get people to join me. So while I went inside this space, I saw the challenges of my ancestors. My ancestors' chattel, owned by the ones who lived in the big houses. They would have been the merchants, the import-exporters, the agrarians. But in these spaces, my ancestors were owned by them. And in these very small spaces, the fireplaces, the remnants of smoke on the wall where they would have made their fires. And when I went into this space for the very first time, all alone, thinking about the people inside these spaces, chattel, not only were they enslaved, but their children and their children's children would be enslaved. And outside of these walls, all the work that they did, they could not benefit from. It was all for the people who owned them. So, my first night inside this space, thinking about all that these people encountered, I finally went to sleep, only to wake up about 3 a.m. to the sounds of dogs barking in the background. And I thought then, that could have been an enslaved person being chased by dogs. And what about the people who would have experienced that? What if they had knowledge of this person trying to escape? Was he successful? And what was the consequences to them had they had knowledge of that person trying to escape? So as I continued on this journey of sleeping in slave dwellings and finding out the rest of the story, you know, that part of the story that's not often told, I thought about the people in these spaces and who built America, who built those nice, beautiful dwellings that the masters were living in, whose labor provided the wealth for those houses to be built, who cut down those logs to frame that house, who made the bricks that's now that house. It was the people in these spaces. And as I examined the bricks, I would put my hands in these fingerprints that I would find. My hands were too big. That meant that there were children making the bricks. And as I continued my journey, I would find out that this thing called slavery was not just relegated to Charleston, South Carolina. This was a national thing. In fact, do you know that 12 of our former presidents were slave owners, 8 of whom owned slaves while they were in office? Now, so far in this journey, I've slept at 3 of those dwellings of our former president. President Andrew Jackson, President Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, of course, inalienable rights. All men are created equal. And then I slipped at this site. In fact, I was at this site just last week, digging in the dirt, doing the archaeology necessary to prove the existence of our enslaved ancestor. This is the home of President James Madison, the home of our fourth president, the father of our Constitution. You know, we the people, I should have read we the people, comma, in this room. Because if you weren't in that room, it meant nothing to you. But now, we know that because of the archaeology that's being done, they're putting the slave dwellings back on this site. Inside the space that our president, James Madison, lived, everybody living in that space with him was one whole person. Everybody living in the slave cabins, 3/5 of a person. And as I continue this journey and I learn about how our ancestors played into the making of this nation, I sleep in these places 100 days later, 17 states, including the states of Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts and Philadelphia and Rhode Island. Yes, this was a northern thing also. So what can you do to make sure that all the story is told? You can help preserve these places. Because if the places are preserved, it's very hard to deny the presence of the people who live there. You can visit these spaces, because when you visit these spaces, you'll have that aha moment. Although good things never happen in those spaces, but those folks endured. And you need to visit these places to see what they endured. And we have to experience the places. And if you have the courage to experience the places the way that I do, the courage to get intimate with these spaces, do what I do. Sleep in these spaces. Thank you.